Hello, everyone. I hope that you guys are getting into the link and that everything is working how it's supposed to be. I'm going to give it about 5 more minutes to let some other people get on and make sure that everything is functioning properly. So if you guys will just hang tight for just a few more minutes, then we'll be ready to get started. Okay, Jessica, I see that you have a few questions. If you want to go ahead and type those in the chat box, we can talk about those while we wait to get on. And can you guys hear me okay? I will not be taking attendance for these streams. Now that we do have a way to lecture over the chapters, I highly recommend that you do hop on for these. If you aren't able to hop on for the stream, if your circumstances have changed, then definitely feel free to watch the videos. I'll post the videos after the class in each week's folder. So for example, this video will be posted in the week 1 folder once we get finished. So the participation article forum in the discussion board, I did get that put up yesterday. You guys have all semester to get that completed, but definitely, the sooner the better. And all that is you can find any article that you find interesting about economics and current events. So it can be about the current COVID-19 pandemic that's going on and how that is affecting the economy. It can be completely unrelated to the virus if you're sick of hearing and talking about that. It can really be about anything that you find interesting. And you'll just need to post a brief summary of the article and a link to that article. That is all that your grade is based on. And essentially, it's going to be a participation grade. So just find something that is in kind of run with that. Does that answer your questions, Jessica? And there is a little bit of a delay from my end to the broadcast end, so please bear with me as we try to kind of navigate this because you guys. Okay, so any more questions before we get started with the Chapter 1 lecture? Okay, and if you do have more questions, Jessica, definitely feel free to email me and we can hop on a call. And another thing I wanted to tell you guys was since we weren't able to cover a chapter on Tuesday, I will be recording and posting a lecture for Chapter 2 so that you guys can watch that and have that to kind of help you study. Okay, so Jessica has another question. I'm going to pop it up on the screen so it's a little bit easier for you guys to see it. So basically the way that the inquisitive is going to work, and we can definitely reiterate this every single class period, is as long as you do the first assignment of the week, you will automatically get 100 for participation on the second assignment. So even if you made an 84 on Chapter 1, as long as you complete the How to Use Inquisitive in Chapter 1, you will automatically get 100 for Chapter 2. Now, that's not to say that Chapter 2 isn't important. It is very important. You will be tested over it. And you can definitely go in and work those problems on Inquisitive, but your final grade will go in as 100 for Chapter 2. So just don't stress about getting the second chapter each week turned in. Just use those as practice questions. So very good question. Okay, so any more questions for now? And thank you, Jessica. I'm sure that everyone else was needing some clarification on those as well. I know our live stream wasn't very good last. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so let's get started on chapter 1. So the first chapter in both macro and micro is the 5 foundations. If you've already taken microeconomics this last 8 weeks, the first couple of chapters that we cover are going to look really familiar to you because they're exactly the same. The reason being because some things across macroeconomics are the same, basic foundation, and these are some things we cover in both classes. So before we get really into it, I just want to kind of distinguish the difference in a macroeconomic microeconomics class. So macroeconomics, what we're taking, we're going to be looking at kind of broad generalizations. We're not going to get real math or really deep into kind of what individual firms are doing. We're going to look at kind of overall patterns and things like that. So typically, people tend to find macroeconomics a little bit easier than microeconomics because it is kind of a more generic and broad sweep of the whole thing. Now, another great thing about economics that's kind of interesting is a lot of times when you take these gen ed courses, you kind of feel like it doesn't really apply to you or it's not something that you can use in your life. Well, economics is great because we all use it every day. So especially with all the crazy things that are going on right now, we're all concerned about the economy and we're all concerned about how we can best set ourselves up for success. So economics is really kind of relevant to everyone. And it's also something that you can use if you ever want to start your own business. It's really good to understand the economy for investing and things like that. So I'm hoping that even though we're having to do this, technology-based, that you'll still be able to get something that you feel is worthwhile from this class. And again, just kind of a side note, as we go, if you have any questions, feel free to type those in that question box. And we'll go ahead and talk about those as well. And it doesn't have to be a question. Even if you just have a comment about something, we can talk about those as well. So the 5 foundations of economics. Oh, let me get that off of here. Let's see. The big questions. These are going to be the things that you most want to focus on every chapter that you're looking at. If you can answer the big questions at the beginning, then you're off to a great start and you'll be in a good position to do well on your exams. So what we're going to look at today is 1, what is economics? And 2, what are the 5 foundations of economics? So what do you guys think, just from your experience, when you think about economics, what's the first thing that comes to mind? You can type it in the box. There's no wrong answers. So just what do you think economics is, just from what you know now? And there is a little bit of a delay, so I'll give you guys a second. I see Alicia says money. Very good. Economics does deal with money. That's a big one. Anyone else? I'll give you guys a second to think about that. But whenever we're thinking of economics, kind of the basic, what we're going to look at, oh, here we go, how the world is running, limited resources. So it is a little behind on my end, so I apologize about that. But yes, those are all great answers. So we have limited resources and unlimited wants. We want to know how the world's running. We want to talk about, how we're feeling as far as our economy. These are all really good answers. So it looks like you guys have kind of a good basic idea. Trade exchange, that's also something we'll talk about this semester. So these are all very great answers. That's really exciting. But basically economics, the reason that we, because it tells us how the world works. It tells us, it makes us an informed citizen so that we can make better decisions with our own money. And everyone about that a lot, and this is a great place to start getting kind of familiar with some of those concepts. And it basically allows us to make better personal finance decisions. So that's kind of why we care about economics. But let's go ahead and get into sort of answering these questions. So we already answered that. We don't need to answer it again. You guys had great answers. I really appreciate the participation. But again, we're just going to talk about in macro, more large, broad issues, and micro, that's going to be more specific issues. Okay, so the purpose of this course, we're going to basically provide you the tools to talk about how the world works, to be informed, to live your life to the fullest, understand markets, and make better personal decisions. Now, it would be naive for me to say that you'll leave this course with every single one of these things completely conquered, but I'm hoping that this will give you a really good foundation so that, you know, even if you don't go forward in your education, particularly in economics, you'll still have these tools to use them in your everyday life. Now, let's see. Okay, so what is economics? Two main economic concepts that we'll talk about all semester are scarcity and just the broad definition of economics. So scarcity, like, let's see, Caden, let's see, Du Bois talked about, I'm sorry, above Caden here. We saw that we have limited resources, right? And that is what scarcity is. We have limited resources and we have unlimited wants. Now, how do we decide who gets what? Like whenever we're looking at a limited resource, how do we decide who gets to, you know, possess things? What do you guys think? And I'll give it a second for some comments to come in. And again, that question was, when we have scarcity and there's only a limited nature of resources, how do we decide who in society gets these resources? Where demand is higher, that's very good. Demand and money, whoever needs that the most. Yes, these are all ways that we decide who gets it, right? And money is one of the biggest ones, so that's very good. Below that, economics, this is just the study of how people allocate our limited resources to satisfy our unlimited wants. So it's basically how people make decisions, and that's what we'll be looking at this semester. Okay, so here's a practice question. I'll give you guys a second to look at this. The question is, what can be said about scarcity? So I'll give you guys a minute to look this over, and then we'll talk about what the answer is. Okay, it looks like a couple people are starting to answer those questions, and the answer was A. Very good. So scarcity forces us to make choices. A good way to think about this, very good, you guys are all doing great on this. But a good way to think about scarcity is think about whenever you get your paycheck. You can't just go out and buy every single thing that you want, and you have to make some decisions about what you're going to have and what you're going to not have. So for example, paying your rent versus being able to go out to eat a lot, or paying your utilities, or deciding to go ahead and splurge a little bit and maybe having to give something up on the other end. So very good. And again, these practice what you know questions will very likely become exam questions. So maybe make a little note of those to, you know, remind you to study those when you're working on your exam. Okay, so macro versus micro, we've already talked about this a little bit, but micro is the study of individual units in the technical definition that make up the economy. So micro is going to focus on individuals, businesses, and industries. Macro is kind of the overall study of economics. So we're looking at the big picture. We care more about, you know, what is averaging, not really what specific things are happening. So some examples of microeconomic questions that would be asked would be, how many movies does a family see each year? What factors affect a person's career choice? How does a rise in sales tax impact the retail industry? So anything that's really specific to a certain very specific group of people. Another example they give is, how would an increase in minimum wage affect teenage employment? So those are all micro questions. Those are things that you would be asked in a micro class and questions that microeconomists would analyze. Now, in macro, the questions that you would be asked are things like, what is the current level of inflation? Or how much has employment grown in India over the past 20 years? Or, in current events, what is going to happen to the unemployment rate in America after this crisis? So these are going to be questions that are focused on very large groups of people. They're not so much focused on those individual smaller subgroups. And we'll kind of get a little bit more into that later in the lecture as well. So the 5 foundations of economics, these are very important. Use this entire semester, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about all of them throughout the semester. But the first is that incentives matter. The second is that life is about trade-offs. The third is opportunity cost. Fourth is marginal thinking. And 5 is trade creates value. So what we'll do is, in the next couple of about each one of these things individually, and it'll kind of tell you a little bit more in depth what each one is. Throughout the semester, we'll kind of dive into each one of these a little bit more specifically. So let me go ahead and move over here. Okay, so incentives. Incentives are the factors that motivate you to act or exert effort. So a good example is, for example, in this class, I told you that if you do the how to use inquisitive in chapter 1 assignments, 100 on chapter 2. Chapter 2 is your incentive to work on those first 2 assignments. Just like next week, your incentive to do chapter 3 is that you want to get 100 on chapter 4. So everywhere in your life, been pretty. So can you guys think of any examples of incentives that get you to do things? Like, what is an incentive that motivates you to go to work? And I'll give you guys a second to answer those before we move on. Your paycheck, yeah, that's a really good incentive, right? Because getting paid, getting money, those are all great answers. We want to get paid. We don't just go to work because we love to go to work. We go to work because we want to get paid, and we are trading our time with the incentive that we are going to be given a paycheck. So that's very good answers. Some other examples of incentives: attendance policies. Yeah, if you work an extra shift on Friday, you get to buy the outfit you want, getting a bonus. These are all really good things. Extra credit points, participation points. These are all things that are not really a new concept. So I'm glad that you guys had some good examples for me there. So incentives aren't always positive. So there's positive and negative incentives. And we're going to pop up just kind of the definitions here. But positive incentives are going to encourage you to do something by offering a reward. So like we said, raising money, buying something you want, bonuses, incentives. But negative incentives exist as well. So negative incentives encourage the action by providing some kind of undesirable consequence or punishment. A good is, if you speed, you could get a ticket and be fined. If you break the law, you could go to jail. If you don't show up at work, you could get fired. These are all negative incentives. So they're just kind of like the reasons that we do what we're supposed to, even when there's not necessarily a positive reward. You don't get a bonus for following the law. You just kind of a negative incentive. There's also direct and indirect. So incentives really matter, and it matters how we present these incentives. Direct incentives, they're very clear. So they're like saying, if your sales this month are over your sales quota, you're going to get a bonus. Don't get any tickets or have any accidents, and we'll reduce your car insurance premiums. So those are very direct, telling you exactly what you need to do and exactly what the reward will be. Indirect incentives, these are a little bit trickier. They're a little bit harder to So an indirect incentive, this is a secondary change in behavior brought on by the original incentive. Now, what that means is to reach a sales quota, a salesperson maybe pushes too hard with some clients and they lose out on time with their family. So that ends up being kind of like a negative incentive there. With the insurance premium example, the direct incentive was them saying, don't get any tickets and we'll reduce your car insurance premium. An indirect incentive of that is that to avoid the insurance company knowing about, a small fender bender, the person might not report it to the police. So we have a difference. What is the difference between direct and positive is the question that we had here. Direct incentives can be positive or negative. So a positive direct incentive is saying, if you do your chapter 1 assignment, I'll give you a 100 on chapter 2. You can have a negative direct incentive that's saying, if you don't do your assignments, I will give you zeros. So that's the difference. Direct can be either positive or negative. It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. So that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. Indirect incentives, these are not the intended incentives. So like with the car insurance example, the direct incentive was intended to encourage people to do indirect, kind of encourages people to maybe hit and run or not call the police. Another example that you guys might know something about, does anyone know kind of what's gone on with Wells Fargo in the last couple of years? Basically, they were opening accounts open for them, so without permission, and they ended up getting into a lot of trouble for it. And the direct incentive. So the direct incentive from Wells Fargo was the more accounts that you open and the more customers that we can serve, you'll get. Now, indirectly, that kind of motivated the employees to do things that weren't necessarily legal or right in order to get their numbers up and get those bonuses, because they wanted to make sure that they were meeting that kind of desired quota. Does that make sense? So that was the indirect incentive, was that they were doing things they weren't supposed to. Very good. Okay, so next one, we're going to talk about unintended consequences. So unintended consequences are an unplanned result, typically negative and unwanted, of an incentive. Sorry about that. I had a little cutout, but I'm back on. But here's where we were at the unintended consequence. So an unintended consequence is when something happens that we didn't expect. Typically, that's going to be negative, and it comes because of an incentive. So a good example of this is welfare programs. So the intention of welfare programs is obviously to help people that need it, right? Earlier, how we kind of determine how to allocate resources. And I saw that. I'm sorry. I'm hoping it's back now. Is the stream back on and you guys can hear me now? And again, just side note, thank you guys so much for being patient with me. I think this is working better than the Google Hangout. You guys can tell me what you think on that. But there's going to be little hiccups just because of the overuse of my Wi-Fi. Yeah, exactly. I see Alpha made a comment that was very good. Okay, I'm glad that it's back. And again, I appreciate you guys so much. I know this is not what you signed up for, but honestly, like, we're going to make it work. So, okay, back to the lecture. An unintended consequence. Welfare programs, they're designed to help people. They're designed to kind of get the needs of people that need it most met, even when they can't necessarily afford to meet those needs themselves. So, what happens with welfare, though? Sometimes the unintended consequence is that people abuse the system, right? Nobody that came up with the welfare system thought it would be great if people abuse the system. That's just kind of an unintended consequence that comes with it. And let's go ahead and move on to the next slide here. Okay, so another practice what you know, and I'll give the stream a second to catch up. Which of the following situations would illustrate an incentive? So I'll give you all a second to read through those, and then we'll just get it done. And in that comment box. So I see a lot of people posting the answer C, and that is correct. So Lee gives his children candy if they will behave during dinner. That's a positive incentive. He's telling them, if you guys, I will give you candy. It's like anytime if your kids that they can have screen time, if they do what they're supposed to, incentive-based actions. Very good. You guys are wonderful. So trade-offs. Life is all, because there's scarcity, we have to have choices, and every decision has a cost. So to have one thing, we're going to have to give up another thing. This is a little bit earlier, just like with when you get your paycheck. If you're going to pay your bills, you're going to pay your utilities and things like that. You might not always be able to buy all of the extra things that you wanted. So that's about, that's what trade-offs are, right? If you decide to spend your time going out and you want to do and you don't study, the trade-off is down, and vice versa. If you do spend all your time, you know, that you're giving up, could have been doing. So we have a comment over here that I wanted to show you guys that says, if I can get to pull up, oh, almost. Sorry, this is a new program for me as well. It won't pull up, but, oh my gosh. Okay, that's all right. The comment was from Alpha, and it says the only way to avoid unintended consequences is to frame the incentive properly. And that's so true. Clear about what, because whenever you have very broad, kind of the door for a lot of other things to happen. So very good. Thank you for that comment. Oh, see, it came up now. Just running a little slow over here on my internet. Okay. Now it's going to pop up a bunch. Sorry about that. Okay, so another practice what you know, the governor decides to increase funding for education, but this means decreasing funding for infrastructure. So what does this situation illustrate? And I'll give you guys a second to answer those. Very good. A, the answer, that is correct, is trade-off. So by increasing funding in one area, they're having to give up some things on another area. That's the trade-off. And there's always a trade-off, but sometimes it's worth it. You just have to analyze if that trade-off is worth it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is opportunity costs. And let me go ahead and just sort of preface this by saying that the opportunity cost is going to be your highest valued alternative that must be sacrificed to get something else. So it's very important to kind of note here, this is not all alternatives, just the next best choice. Scarcity basically makes us make choices, and then because we make choices, we have opportunity costs. Now, this is going to be the next best alternative, so we're assuming in economics that people are going to make the best use or the best decision. Because we're human, people don't always make the decision that's best for them. But in our case, we're going to assume that you're going to use the information that is present to make the best possible choice for you. Does that make sense? And we'll talk about opportunity costs a little more. So if it doesn't make a ton of sense yet, don't panic. Okay, let's move to the next slide here. So what is the opportunity cost of attending college? Whenever you attend for tuition and fees, books, earnings, you know, things like that. Do we think that this is an opportunity cost from attending college. Now that would clear the way. Whenever you choose to spend your money on your tuition and fees and your books, and you're kind of giving up your spent on your room. You're maybe giving up a little bit whenever you decide to pay for college. Now, why do we still pay for college and spend our money on college, even though we could be spending that money on something else? Well, typically the reason being is that we're hoping for a better payoff in the long run, that by taking the time, spending the money, and working really hard, that once you have your degree and you go get a job, you're going to get paid more and it's going to be worth it in the long run. So that's kind of the opportunity cost there, is we're giving up maybe some extra cash or the ability to work full-time right now, but the reason that we're doing that was because in the future it'll be a little bit more worth it. So the opportunity cost of buying a good is what? I'll give you guys a second to read this over and then we'll talk about the answer. Very good. I see answers starting to come in, and that is correct. The answer on this one is B. So this is the value of the next best alternative that you could have purchased. If you didn't buy, it would have been the next best alternative to buy instead. Very good. So another common concept that we'll talk about a lot this semester is marginal thinking. So economic thinking is going to require purposeful evaluation of available opportunities to make the best decision possible. All that basically means is that we have to look at all the information that we have available to us, which isn't always going to be all the information we need, and then try to make the best decision that we can based on that information. Marginal thinking requires us to kind of evaluate whether the benefit of one more unit of something is greater than the cost. Now, with marginal thinking, we don't always know, but in economics, a lot of times we can put a quantifiable number on this. A good way to think about this, as kind of indicated by this little picture over on the side, is when you're eating something. You don't usually know, like let's say that you go out to get pizza, you don't usually know exactly how many slices of pizza would satisfy you and make you perfectly happy. We don't know what the right amount of pizza is. So as you're eating those slices, you finish a piece and you say, do I want to eat one more piece of this? And then you kind of weigh the options. Am I still hungry? Would it make me happy to eat one more piece? Or am I so full that it's going to make me miserable piece? And we kind of don't know what that exact is until we get there, or in some cases go over it, right? So suppose living room, we're wondering, will you move your couch and your dining cabinet? Look at what is the marginal cost. The marginal benefit here is that your carpet is clean. So if you have a really heavy couch and you decide to move that couch to vacuum, now this little extra piece of carpet is clean, is that it's going to take longer this heavy to keep it. Now, as long as your marginal benefit is greater than your marginal cost, we're always going to go with the extra of whatever. We're going to move the couch to whatever if that benefit costs. Now, determining if that benefit is greater than the cost really depends on a lot of different factors. So for example, if I have bad allergies and I have to vacuum absolutely everything to make sure that I don't have allergy problems, the benefit of moving that couch might be a lot more worth it to me than the cost. If you live in an apartment by yourself and you don't have any pets and you're not a very messy person, the cost of having to move that couch and the time that it's going to take you, that might not be worth it for the benefit on your end. So you may decide that that's not quite worth it. So depending on, personal preference and a lot of other things, that, determining if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost can be a little bit tricky. For the purposes of our class, they'll always clearly define what that benefit is and kind of how to determine that. That won't be something you're expected to guess on. But it's just important to note that in the real world, obviously, benefits and costs are different to different people. But as long as that marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, we'll always kind of consume that extra unit or do the extra work, whatever it may be. So here's another practice question for you. With regards to marginal thinking, an individual will do an action if what? And I'll give you guys a second to answer that. I see some answers coming in, and that is correct. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to pop that up. Wrong screen. The answer is D. Very good. So as long as the marginal benefit is greater than the cost, we will go ahead and move forward with that endeavor. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is how trade creates value. So markets are going to bring buyers and sellers together to exchange goods and services, and trade is the voluntary exchange of goods and services between two or more parties. Now, the very important highlighted word here is voluntary. If somebody is forcing you to sell something or to purchase something, that is not trade because you're not voluntarily like engaging in that action. Markets, this doesn't have to be like a physical marketplace, like a farmer's market or a store or anything like that. Anywhere that you're able to conduct business is a market. So Amazon, that's the Amazon marketplace. If you are looking for a car and you go online on Facebook or on a car dealership's website or Craigslist or anything like that, that is also a market. It's just anywhere where buyers and sellers can be brought together to exchange goods and services. And then trade, again, it's just voluntary exchange of goods between two or more parties. So keep that in mind as well. The circular flow is a kind of an important economic concept. This just shows us how resources and final goods and services are going to flow through the economy. So we have two markets. We have our resource market and our product market. And let's just kind of look at what the circular flow looks like in diagram form. So the circular flow, we have our product market that's selling items to households. Households go to work, and that puts things into this resource market. The resource market goes into firms because we have to provide labor and things like that, and then firms make products. Basically, all that the circular flow is explaining to you is that buying is a very interconnected process, right? Yeah, market squares, bazaars, etc. That's a good answer on as far as like what markets are. Alpha down there. So this is kind of just, and again, there is a little bit of a delay on my end for seeing your comments. So if I do circle back on comments, it's just because they popped up a little bit late on my end. So sorry about that. Okay, so bartering, this is when individuals trade a good or service in exchange for something they want. The reason that bartering can be kind of difficult is because you have to achieve this double coincidence of wants. And basically all that means is that you have something that the other person wants, and they also have something that you want. So that's not super common. That's kind of the exact reason why we have money, because it would be a lot more work to always have to go out and try to find somebody that had what you want, but also wanted what you have, if that makes sense. Without money, you have to barter. It's kind of interesting. You might notice on, if you're on Facebook, that on a lot of the Facebook marketplaces right now, people are doing a lot more bartering than they typically do. So usually on Facebook Marketplace, it's just people selling things for cash. There's not a lot of trading going on. But now with a lot of the shortages that we have going on, people are trading, you know, certain non-perishable goods for things like toilet paper. So we're kind of in an interesting bartering phase right now. Having money removes that difficulty of achieving that double coincidence of wants. So that's kind of an important thing to keep in mind. But if you don't have money, then you're forced to barter. The circular flow of money added in, this is just kind of adding to that previous graph that we looked at. So again, we've already discussed sort of how that circular flow works. This is just kind of showing you that money is going in and out of the firms and households to facilitate the resource and product market. And we'll go ahead and move on from there. So trade creates value. You wouldn't trade if you didn't have to, but without trade, you would have to produce every single thing that you're going to consume. So think about that. That would be a little bit crazy, right? Your clothing, all of your food, all of your household items. It would be very hard to produce every single thing that we consume. Trade allows us to exchange goods, and it basically promotes specializing. So without trade, we would have to do a lot of things and probably not do any of them very well. But because you're able to go and buy different things that you need, you're able to specialize in specific areas that we maybe have a comparative advantage in. Comparative advantage is something that we will talk about in a lot more detail a little bit later in this semester, but basically this is just to kind of introduce that concept to you. And comparative advantage just means that an individual, business, or country is able to produce a product at a lower So this is why money is called currency. I see your comment, but can you expand on that a little bit for me, and we'll circle back to it? I'm waiting for it to pop up. Sorry. And again, I hope that this has been a little bit better for you guys today than what Tuesday was like, and I hope that it will just get better and better as I get more familiar with the software and things like that. But thank you so much for kind of like bearing with me while we try to change everything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide while we wait for that comment to come in. But I conclude what we've talked about in this chapter. Ask and answer big questions about life. It's not a perfect science, but there is a lot of ways that we can kind of get it close to that. And this kind of makes economics fascinating. I realize it's a bit of a stretch to call economics fascinating, but I promise that there will be at least one thing this semester that you'll just think is really cool. And use that for your article. Economics studies how people allocate limited resources and satisfy our nearly unlimited wants. Yes, circular flow, the current of electricity, currency. Very good. I never thought of it that way, but that is true. So if you're wondering what I'm referring to here, over in the comments we have Alpha told us, if it will show up, that it's why money is called currency. I wasn't sure what exactly he was talking about, but if you missed that, the circular flow, it's like a current of electricity, so currency. So very good. Thank you for that comment. That was a good comment. And then the last thing that we covered today in this slideshow was the 5 foundations of economics. So here they are again. We have incentives. Remember, they can be good or bad, direct or indirect. We have trade-offs, opportunity costs, marginal thinking, and talking about how trade creates value. So that is the end of the slideshow for this chapter. Again, I'll record kind of a lecture video for chapter 2. I want to just apologize in advance without having you guys kind of interacting in the comments. It is just going to be a little bit of, me just talk. So if there's, maybe look through the slides for chapter 2, and if there's a certain area that you're confused, fast forward to the lecture up, because it's not going to be as engaging as this. So if you don't have to go ahead and log off, we did get done a little bit early today. If you do have questions, please stay on and type those questions in the comment box. And also, not just questions, if you want to give me feedback on how this worked today, that would be really appreciated in the comment box as well, so that I can just keep kind of working to make this better and better for you guys as we try to navigate this weird semester. So thank you guys so much. Again, if you don't have any questions, feel free to log off. If you do have questions, I'll be waiting for those. And there is a delay on my end, so I'm sorry if it takes a little bit longer. So a question that came in was, are we required to read from the ebook? My hope is that you would be reading all of these chapters from the book as well. Obviously, realistically, I know that you guys do not have time, and in a lot of classes, it's just not something that you're going to be doing. I would recommend look through the PowerPoint and at least browse through each chapter and kind of brush up on the areas that you're not as familiar with, and that will kind of align your exams. So reading, but realistically, I understand you might not have time to read the whole chapter, but at least kind of thumb through it for me and make sure that you're ready for your exams. And I will have those exam reviews up by tomorrow, so you'll be able to start working on the exam reviews for your first exam. That was a very good question. Thank you, Mario. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions? It looks like I have just a couple of you left on here, so I'll wait and see if anyone else has anything they want to ask. Okay, if there's no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and log off. You guys go ahead and log off if you don't have any more questions, but I will keep myself online, so if you are typing a question, don't panic. I'm still on. I'm just muting my camera. So you won't be able to see me, but I am still here if you're typing questions. Thank you so much. So Teresa says, I have an instructor who is using Blackboard's Collaborate and it works very well. This was a little bit choppy. So I'm going to try and stick with to Collaborate's working very well. I'll start looking into that this weekend and see what I can do. Was it better than the Google Hangout was, though? Is my main question here. And also, I believe that whenever I post the finished videos after the class, that it should be considerably less choppy than it is in real time. But Blackboard Collaborate, that sounds like a really good option as well. Okay, thank you, Teresa. That was a good question. Thank you for the suggestion on Blackboard Collaborate. That will be good as well. Yeah, the live is being recorded. So this video of our entire lecture and everything that we've talked about, that will be posted in the folder as like an archive so that it can be recorded and or it can be rewatched later, excuse me. Okay, so this question, just kind of covering again what subject we're going to have to write on before the end of the semester. All that you have to do is select an article about any economic concept that's a current event that you find interesting. So it can be any current events article. You can basically tie anything back to economics, but all that you'll need to do is in that discussion forum, post a link to your article so that other students can read it if they want to, and then give a brief summary. So just kind of saying what the article was about, why you found it interesting, and that is what you'll be graded on. So definitely feel free to comment on your classmates' posts and things like that. But your grade is only based on you finding an article that's based on a current event and just kind of giving a brief summary and discussing why you found that article interesting. So don't stress yourselves out about this assignment. You have the entire semester to complete it, and it's going to be a very basic, it's really more for you to kind of branch out and have fun doing it rather than a difficult project. So I'm not going to grade those very strictly at all. Very good question. Thank you for asking about that again. All right, any more questions before we hop off here for today? You're welcome. All right, well, I will see you guys on Tuesday, and hopefully, I'll just do my best to try to make this a little bit better for next week, but I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these videos and to comment and things like that. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.